this lounge is for faculty and staff only. I'm gonna need you to pack up and leave.
I'm waiting for a meeting. I was told to wait here.
Who told you that?
The dean's office. I have an appointment at 2.
I'm gonna need some ID because you don't look like you belong here.
I beg your pardon?
Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be.
The body cam clip to Officer Brett Saunders' chest recorded everything, every word, every movement. And he had absolutely no idea that the woman he was about to remove from that building had spent the last 11 years writing the laws he was supposed to enforce, chairing the state Senate Committee on Public Safety, and authoring the bill that funded his department's entire training program. The woman sitting in that armchair wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling for her phone. She wasn't trying to explain herself to anyone. She was Senator Victoria Clark, and she had grilled police chiefs in front of packed Senate chambers. She had cross-examined commissioners under oath. She had cast the deciding vote on 3 pieces of legislation that reformed police conduct standards across the entire state. And now she was about to become the reason the Hargrove Police Department rewrote its community engagement policy from the ground up. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you think elected officials should be able to sit in a chair without being harassed, hit that subscribe button right now. Victoria Clark was 49 years old and had not arrived where she was by accident. She grew up in the same city where Caldwell University stood, went to public schools 2 miles from that campus, and watched for years as a prestigious institution that shaped the lives of everyone around it treated the surrounding community like it didn't exist. She got her undergraduate degree in political science from a state school on a full academic scholarship. She got her law degree at night while working full-time. She passed the bar on her first attempt. She spent 6 years as a public defender before running for state senate on a platform of criminal justice reform, police accountability, and reinvestment in underserved communities. She won by 11 points. She won again 4 years later by 19, and again after that by 24. Each time, her margins grew because she did exactly what she said she would do. She showed up, she passed legislation, she held people accountable. Her committee, the Senate Committee on Public Safety and Civil Rights, had oversight of every law enforcement agency in the state. She had called police chiefs to testify. She had reviewed use of force data. She had personally drafted the language in the Civil Rights Enforcement Act that created independent oversight boards in every major city. She was also, as it happened, scheduled to deliver the keynote address at Caldwell University's annual Criminal Justice Symposium at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The dean himself had invited her 6 months ago. She was being considered for an honorary degree, but none of that was visible when she walked into the faculty lounge in a blazer and slacks and sat down to review her notes while she waited. No entourage, no assistant, no name tag announcing who she was, just a black woman sitting in a chair in a building where, according to Officer Brett Saunders, she didn't belong. Brett Saunders was 38 years old and had been with the Hargrove Police Department for 11 years. He was assigned to the University District, a beat that mostly meant responding to noise complaints, parking violations, and the occasional student altercation. Quiet work, predictable. He knew every building on that campus, every access point, every space that was open to the public, and every one that wasn't. The university had a formal agreement with the Hargrove Police Department. Officers on the district beat were authorized to respond to calls on campus and conduct routine welfare checks inside university buildings. Brett had been doing it for years. He knew which rooms filled up with students and which ones were genuinely restricted. He had the access, he had the authority to be there. What he didn't have was any reason to stop Victoria Clark. The faculty lounge in Caldwell Hall sat in a gray area. There was a sign on the door, but in practice, the room filled up with graduate students, visiting lecturers, administrative staff, and guests of the department all the time. Brett mostly left them alone. He had learned quickly that hassling people with legitimate business on campus created complaints, and complaints created paperwork. But Brett had a particular alertness that switched on in certain situations. He couldn't have described it in precise terms. He would have said he was just good at reading a room, knowing who fit and who didn't. Over the previous 3 years, his incident log showed 28 stops, ID requests, or removals in and around university buildings. Of those 28 interactions, 22 involved Black or Latino individuals. The surrounding area was about 24% Black and 19% Latino. The numbers didn't line up, but no one in the department had ever sat down and looked at them together. Each incident existed in its own file, isolated, unconnected, unremarkable on its own. Nobody had looked at the pattern. Nobody had asked why Brett's instincts seemed to activate so specifically. He had just been allowed to keep going, one quiet stop at a time, in a district where his word was usually the only word that mattered, until today. Victoria had arrived at Caldwell Hall at 1:15 in the afternoon, 45 minutes before her meeting with Dean Hartwell. His assistant, a young woman named Claire, had met her at the entrance, walked her to the faculty lounge, and told her to make herself comfortable. She offered coffee. Victoria declined. Claire said the dean would be down by 2 and left. Victoria sat in an armchair near the window, pulled out her phone, and started reviewing her notes for the keynote. She had speaking points on sentencing reform, data on recidivism rates, 3 case studies she planned to use as examples. She was focused, she was quiet, she wasn't bothering a single person. Brett came through on a routine pass at 1:28 in the afternoon. His body cam was on, as required by department policy, whenever he entered a building on a non-emergency basis. He scanned the lounge. He saw Victoria. Something flagged. He didn't recognize her face. She wasn't wearing a faculty badge or a visitor lanyard. She didn't look like the people who usually occupied that room. He walked over. He told her the lounge was for faculty and staff only, and she needed to pack up and leave. Victoria looked up from her phone. She took a breath. She had been in enough rooms to know exactly what was happening and exactly what kind of energy she was dealing with. She told him she was waiting for a meeting and had been told to wait there. Brett asked who told her that. She told him the dean's office, that she had an appointment at 2. He asked for her ID. Then he said the words that would end up quoted in the formal complaint, the lawsuit filing, the internal affairs report, and eventually national news coverage. He told her she didn't look like she belonged there. Victoria set her phone down on the arm of the chair, very deliberately, very slowly. She asked him to repeat himself. Brett, still not understanding what he had just walked into, told her not to make it harder than it needed to be. Victoria didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand up. She didn't reach for anything. She just looked at him with the steady, measured expression of a woman who had spent 11 years in political chambers where people tried to intimidate her for sport and had never once succeeded. She asked him a direct question. What specifically made her look like she didn't belong? Brett said the lounge was restricted to faculty and staff. She said she understood that. She asked again what about her appearance suggested she wasn't authorized to be there. Brett shifted his weight. He said he didn't recognize her. She pointed out that she wasn't a faculty member. She was a guest of the dean. She asked if the lounge policy required guests to be personally recognized by responding officers before they could sit down. Brett said guests needed an escort or a visitor badge from the front desk. Victoria said she had been escorted to this exact chair by the dean's assistant 20 minutes ago. She asked if that counted. Brett said he hadn't seen that. She said that wasn't her problem. Brett tried to regroup. He said he was just doing his job, and if she would show him some ID, they could sort everything out quickly. Victoria asked him directly, was she being detained? Brett hadn't expected that question. Most people didn't ask that question. They handed over their ID because they were nervous, or because they wanted the uncomfortable moment to end, or because they simply didn't know they had any other option. They didn't ask about their legal status in the interaction. He said she wasn't being detained. He was just asking for identification. She said if she wasn't being detained, she was free to remain where she was and continue waiting for her meeting. Brett's jaw tightened. A student walking through the corridor had stopped near the doorway. A faculty member at a desk in the corner of the room had stopped pretending to read. The body cam was running. Everything was being recorded. Brett lowered his voice and told her he could have her removed from the building. Victoria didn't lower hers. She said he could try. And then he could explain to the dean why his keynote speaker was standing on the pavement instead of delivering her address to 400 people in the auditorium downstairs. That was the first moment Brett felt something shift. Keynote speaker, dean. But even then, he didn't stop. Because stopping would have meant admitting he had been wrong from the first word he said. And Brett Saunders hadn't spent 11 years in this district by admitting he was wrong. He asked her name. She told him. She watched his face. The name meant nothing to him. That absence of recognition gave him just enough confidence to keep going. He said he would need to verify her story with the dean's office. She told him to go right ahead. Brett stepped back and got on his radio. He called dispatch and asked them to contact the administrative office of the College of Social Sciences and confirm whether a guest named Victoria Clark was expected at 2 o'clock. The response took about 90 seconds. When it came back, the dispatcher's voice had changed, slower, more careful. She confirmed that yes, Senator Clark was on the approved guest list. She was the keynote speaker for the symposium. She had been cleared through the university's administrative office 3 weeks prior. Brett stood there with the radio in his hand. The student in the doorway had his phone out and was recording. The faculty member at the desk had stopped pretending entirely. A second student had appeared behind the first, craning to see what was happening. Nobody in that room was looking away. This was the moment Brett's whole body understood what his brain hadn't caught up to yet. The confirmation from dispatch hadn't just told him he was wrong about who she was. It had told him, in front of witnesses and on a running body cam, that he had approached a woman with no justification, told her she didn't look like she belonged, and then stood there unable to answer a single question she asked him. Everything he said from that point forward was going to be measured against that. Brett should have apologized and walked away. That was the only move available to him that had any chance of limiting the damage. A genuine acknowledgement that he had made a mistake and a quiet exit. Instead, he said what officers say when they have lost the argument but cannot admit it. He told her he was just following protocol, that anyone in a restricted area without visible credentials was subject to verification, that this wasn't personal. Victoria looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, that she wanted his name, his badge number, and the name of his supervising officer. He gave all three. Department policy required him to. Victoria typed the information into her phone along with the time, the date, the location, and a word-for-word account of what he had said, including the line about her not looking like she belonged. Then she told him she would be requesting the body cam footage through a formal public records request before end of business. Brett started to say something else. Victoria held up one hand, not aggressively, just a quiet, final signal that the conversation was over. She picked up her phone and made a call. Brett stood there for a moment, not sure whether to leave or stay. Then he left. Victoria spoke to her chief of staff. She gave him Brett's name and badge number. She told him she wanted a formal complaint filed with the department's internal affairs division that afternoon, and that she wanted the body cam footage preservation request sent immediately before anyone in the department had a chance to decide the footage was inconvenient. She ended the call, she picked up her notes and went back to reviewing them. At 2:04 in the afternoon, Dean Hartwell came down personally to walk her to the auditorium. He apologized for the incident before she could say anything. He told her the university had already been contacted by the police department's liaison office. She thanked him and told him whatever apology came from the university needed to be formal and in writing. She delivered her keynote at 2:15 in the afternoon. She spoke for 40 minutes on police accountability, civil rights enforcement, and what happens when people in positions of authority confuse the exercise of power with the rule of law. She did not mention Brett Saunders by name. She didn't need to. Half the auditorium had already seen the students recording. But the people who were in that room said something struck them that afternoon that went beyond the subject matter. They said, watching her stand at that podium, composed and precise and completely in command of the room, knowing what she had been put through an hour earlier in the building right above their heads, was something they wouldn't forget. She had been told she didn't belong in that building. And then she walked into a room inside that same building and held 400 people's attention for 40 minutes without missing a single beat. That was its own kind of answer. The student who had recorded from the doorway posted his footage online at 3:47 that afternoon. He had captured Brett's approach, the exchange, the radio call, and the moment Brett stood there in silence while dispatch confirmed everything Victoria had said was true. By 6 that evening, it had 90,000 views. By midnight, it had cleared 500,000. By the next morning, every local news outlet had picked it up. By the afternoon, it was national. The clip was under 3 minutes long. It showed a police officer approaching a composed black woman, telling her she didn't look like she belonged, being asked calm and precise questions he couldn't answer, and then standing with a radio in his hand while his own dispatch confirmed he was wrong about everything. There was no ambiguity, no dispute about what was said. The body cam and the student's recording told the exact same story from 2 different angles. The Hargrove Police Department's Internal Affairs Division opened an investigation within 48 hours. They had no choice. Senator Clark's formal complaint had arrived the same afternoon as the incident. Her chief of staff had already submitted the public records request for the body cam footage. The video was everywhere. The department's public affairs office was fielding calls from journalists. The investigation was assigned to Lieutenant Carol Mays, a 24-year veteran who had investigated over 300 officer conduct complaints. She pulled the body cam footage. She interviewed 11 witnesses. She reviewed Brett's full incident log going back 3 years. That log was where things became truly serious. The pattern it revealed was not subtle once someone looked at it. 28 stops, removals, or ID requests over 3 years. 22 of the people involved were Black or Latino in a district where the combined population was about 43%. The breakdown for white individuals with similar or lesser apparent authorization for the same spaces was almost zero. Lieutenant Mays interviewed Brett over 2 sessions. He maintained throughout that he was following procedure, that he had no way of knowing who Victoria Clark was before he approached her, that the lounge was technically a restricted space. Mays noted in her report that none of that addressed the central problem. The question was never whether the lounge had a sign on the door. The question was why Brett had approached Victoria specifically, while leaving dozens of other unverified visitors to the same spaces completely alone. He had no answer for that, because the answer was sitting in his own data and he knew it. The department's findings were unambiguous. Brett had made contact without reasonable justification. He had failed to de-escalate when given clear opportunities to do so. He had made a statement that could only be interpreted as reflecting a racially biased assessment of who belonged in a given space. And he had a documented history of the same pattern of behavior going back years. The recommendation was termination. Brett was informed of the findings and given the standard choice: resign now or face a public termination hearing. He resigned 11 weeks after the incident. His letter said he was pursuing other opportunities. Everyone in the department knew what that meant. He has not worked in law enforcement since. According to public records, he works at a private security firm on the other side of the state. He has not spoken publicly about the incident. People who know him say he still believes he was treated unfairly, that he was singled out for political reasons, that he was just doing his job. He was not just doing his job. The body cam proved it. The data confirmed it. And the senator made sure neither one was ignored. Victoria's attorney filed a federal civil rights lawsuit 3 months after the incident. The complaint was 38 pages and left nothing out. It documented the encounter in precise detail, cross-referenced against the body cam footage timestamp by timestamp. It laid out Brett's stop history and the racial breakdown. It detailed the department's failure to identify or address the pattern despite 3 prior complaints from other individuals. It was the kind of document that makes the city's legal team reach for the phone before they have finished reading it. The city attorney's office reviewed everything and gave the mayor one piece of advice: settle quickly and settle seriously, because if this reached a jury, the verdict would be devastating. A state senator sitting in a chair told she doesn't belong there on a running body cam. No jury in the country sides with the officer in that room. Settlement negotiations lasted 5 weeks. The final figure was $695,000. Along with the monetary settlement, the agreement required mandatory retraining of all officers in the University District on constitutional stops and community engagement, implementation of a quarterly data audit system to flag racial disparities in officer stop patterns, creation of a civilian review panel with authority to examine complaint histories, a formal written apology from the chief of police, and an independent review of all prior complaints against Brett Saunders. That last item mattered. The independent review found 2 individuals who had previously been stopped by Brett and walked away without filing complaints because they didn't know how or didn't believe anything would come of it. Both were contacted, both were informed of their options, both ultimately received modest compensation through a supplementary settlement process the city agreed to as part of the broader resolution. Victoria donated a portion of her settlement to a legal aid organization that helps low-income residents file civil rights complaints. The rest covered attorney fees and provided some measure of compensation for what she had been put through. She did not speak publicly about the amount. She didn't think that was the point. The body cam footage became one of the most widely used training clips in law enforcement education over the following 2 years. Not because of what was dramatic in it, but precisely because of what wasn't. No raised voices, no physical confrontation, just a woman who knew exactly what was happening and handled it with complete precision. And an officer who had no answer for the most basic question she asked him: why her? 3 other police departments in the state quietly audited their own stop data after the story broke. 2 found patterns similar to what Hargrove had missed for years. Both implemented corrective measures before any lawsuit was filed. Victoria introduced legislation the following session, requiring all municipal police departments to conduct annual demographic audits of officer stop data and to report the findings publicly. The bill passed. She named it after no one in particular. Senator Victoria Clark is still in office. She won her next election by her widest margin yet. Her committee's oversight authority has expanded. She has since passed 2 more pieces of legislation on institutional accountability and civil rights enforcement. She still speaks at universities, she has returned to Caldwell twice since the incident. Both times, the dean met her at the door. The faculty lounge in Caldwell Hall now has a clear guest check-in process. Visitors are issued a card at the front desk. No individual officer decides on the fly who belongs and who doesn't. The system that turned out to be no system at all is gone. Lieutenant Carol Mays, who ran the internal affairs investigation, was promoted to captain the following year. She now oversees training for the entire department. She uses this case in every session she runs on bias and constitutional policing. She shows the body cam footage and asks recruits one question: at what point should he have stopped? The best answers say he never should have started. The student who recorded from the doorway is now in his second year of law school. He says the incident is one of the main reasons he is there. What happened in that lounge on a Tuesday afternoon was not complicated. A woman sat in a chair. An officer decided that was a problem. She disagreed. She was right, he was wrong. And because she knew exactly what her rights were, stayed calm, asked the right questions, and started documenting from the very first moment, the truth was never in any real danger of being buried. But that is what stays with you when you sit with this story. Victoria had advantages most people don't have. She knew to ask if she was being detained. She knew to request the body cam footage immediately. She had a chief of staff she could call from that armchair. She had an attorney on the phone within the hour. She had the kind of public profile that meant the story would be covered and couldn't be quietly managed away. Most people in that chair don't have any of that. Most people feel the pressure of the moment, the discomfort, the desire for the whole thing to just be over, and they leave. They take their things and they go. They are angry about it for weeks and then they move on, because what else is there to do when you don't have the tools to make it mean anything? That is exactly what gets counted on. That is the mechanism. The assumption that people won't know their rights, won't push back, won't have the resources to follow through. That most incidents will remain exactly what they look like from the outside. Nothing. A quiet conversation. Someone who decided to leave. Victoria Clark didn't leave. And because she didn't, 3 years of a pattern that had been working exactly as designed finally got seen. Finally had a cost. Finally produced something that might protect the next person who walked into that building and sat down in a chair they had every right to sit in. That is what accountability looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, just documented, precise, and followed all the way through. Drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done in that chair. Would you have left when he asked the first time, or would you have stayed? And if this story means something to you, share it, because the only way stories like this reach people who need to hear them is if you help them get there. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.